Getting really, really good at art is often less about learning more and more and more about doing the really basic things all the time, about being consistent and not just forgetting to do something that's really important. Often, the number one reason that I see intermediate artists or students or people are really struggling to get that consistent professional look working, the reason their images are falling down is because they've just forgotten something really, really basic. In this video, what I want to talk about is the concept of remembering and maybe writing a list and sticking it to your wall of things that you shouldn't forget because you already know them. Yet, if you miss it, this is going to be the thing that derails your image. This is something that I found really, really useful early on, and I'll also share with you the 3 things that I think are probably the most important when it comes to this. But listen to this video and let me know in the comments down below what your list is and which things you have constantly forgotten to do with your images in terms of applying some foundational concept, some compositional concept, some really basic idea. And through missing this, we've kind of failed to really create something great. I think this is often the secret to leveling up, is just remembering to do the basics on every single image. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Mcburnie. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about illustration and picture making, you can check out my free illustration mini workshop. It charts my journey going from an amateur to a professional, and I talk a lot about really important issues such as how to get more detail and polish in your work, how to plan your images, create thumbnails, and also a few thoughts on how to approach being a professional artist. As I said, it's free. The link will be in the description. Go check it out if that's something you're interested in. Let me unpack this concept a little bit more, just so we're sort of clear, because this is one of these things that's like really frustrating. And I would kind of notice this when I was sort of teaching in a university environment, or when I was teaching like online courses where it's like, a whole bunch of people going through an 8-week course, is that we had covered these things. These are often really basic ideas. Like a good one is putting in your ground plane. Like we need to figure out where our ground plane is if we're drawing pretty much anything, because that is a great way to figure out, even if you're just drawing a character, where they're standing. If you're drawing a car, let's put in the ground plane. Then you know how far above the ground it is. If you're trying to draw a scene, figure out where the ground plane is. Then you can place all your characters. But people would kind of just skip it or do it here but not do it there. And this is what I notice is like often, and then that would happen, and then your characters are all floating everywhere, or your car is like sitting below the ground, and it's just like things just don't work. You have different objects. Anyway, I feel like this goes for so many basic observations about art, where often I would imagine most people know the things that they have to do, but they're not understanding that by not doing them with every image, they're really derailing the chance of that thing ever working. We're often making a fundamental mistake at some point by not doing something really basic. Another great one is, have you done a tonal plan for your image? Have you figured out what is going to be light and dark? People skip this, or they do it and then they don't apply it. And what you find is often success is not a matter of like, oh, I'm getting really good at rendering, I'm getting really good at perspective. It's like, just do the basic stuff, but do all of the basic stuff on every image. And that's often the difference between a really high-level professional artist and someone who's kind of struggling. Is like, if you're struggling, you can have all the skills, you can have all the technical capability, you can know all the theory, but because you're missing just one thing, it all falls apart. And I often find what professionals do is they just do the basic stuff with every image, and they really know what is going to trip them up. And this really is what I found to be the problem with a lot of people not being able to apply the theory, is you often know what to do, but you haven't practiced it enough. You haven't gotten to the point where it's natural and automatic to always do all these steps, and that's often the problem. So something that I found really useful was actually to like write some of these down, and I just literally on a bit of paper, often, pretty sort of aggressively, like, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. And I often joke, this is something I probably need to make at some point, is like you could probably write like all the rules that you ever needed to know about art on like a A4 or letter bit of paper. And the problem is not that we need to know more than that. It's just that we need to know what those mean. And we need to do them all the time, every time. And a professional artist, as I said, is just someone who's learned how to do that to the point where it feels wrong to miss one of those basic steps. And I think this is a really good way to think about how to improve your art, because often we're after more and better and special and fancy. And honestly, from my experience, learning to do this by myself and figuring it out and making these same mistakes, where like I would do exactly this. I would rush ahead and do some image and think I could skip something, and then I'd look at it and I'd be like, why does this suck? Or like, why is this not working? And then it would be like, oh, I did this again. I forgot to do the basic thing. I thought I was smarter than this. I thought I was cleverer than this, but this got me. And often the experience that I had of like me getting better and me feeling more professional it wasn't me knowing more. It was me going back to that well of foundational concepts, compositional concepts, like picture making concepts, getting the process right, going through it every time. And it felt like a lot early on. It felt like, this is too much. I can't be bothered. Like I'm overwhelmed. I just want to do my art. I just want to be creative. But the reality is, once you get used to doing these things and they just become part of the natural way you think and you make art, that's when you become that professional artist and you just kind of don't think about it. And once you sublimate and get used to your process, making sure you do all these bits and pieces that we'll kind of talk about a little bit more, that's often when the real magic starts to happen. Because often great art is just art that kind of isn't doing anything silly, right? I often say this about perspective. Perspective is about consistency. You can have artists who aren't following every rule of perspective, but they're being consistent with the ones that they are applying. It's the same with lighting. It's the same with everything. Like I have a really flat art style. I often don't add much shading at all, but I'm very consistent about it. And I'm not accidentally going against the grain of what I'm doing. And often really like amateur looking art or art that is kind of not quite at that high professional level is just often missing a couple of key concepts, or it's just making some fundamental mistake. And it really just jumps out of the page at you and becomes really obvious. And really, honestly, this is the thing that has made the most difference, is just making sure I do all the basic stuff and get it done right. And it took me a long time to really understand that, as opposed to chasing all these kind of fancy techniques. But yeah, this is honestly what I notice as being the big difference. So what are we going to do? Let me give you 3 here to start with that I think are really, really important, will apply to absolutely everyone. I'll show you a couple examples of kind of what I mean, showing you some of my art. And in the comments down below, let me know whether you can think of any on your own that kind of apply to your art. Or is there like one thing that you really find that you are consistently forgetting to do that if you did it, would improve your art? The first thing that I think will apply to pretty much everyone, no matter what style you have, although for some more than others, and this is really simple, right? It's like really simple, but it's honestly at the root of most problems with art is, where is your light source? Where is the light source in your image right now? Do you know? And so often we'd be having these conversations where I'd look at an image that someone's done, either me or like a student or someone, and early on I'd have this trouble where I'd kind of been pretty vague with it. Because often we just kind of start rendering something and that kind of looks pretty cool. But if you don't really figure out where it is early on, or you're not consistent with it, stuff never really works. I'd look at an image and we'd sort of be having an object in one side of it is lit as if the light is coming from this direction, and then over the other side of the image there's another object that's lit from another direction. And you have a face rendered as if the light is from one direction, but then the arm looks like, the light's coming from a different direction. It's not consistent, and this is often at the root of rendering and illustration kind of not working. And it's why, like, when you create more complicated scenes, you really need to think this through early on. Now, let me show you a couple of examples here. I am not the best example of this because I'm often dealing with a more cartoony style, very flat. I often don't put a lot of rendering and shading in here, but this is where the idea of consistency is really important to understand, because Even though I'm not putting a lot of really direct form-based lighting, my art style is much more shape-based. It's good to also understand that and like sort of where you are on that spectrum. But I'm often trying to be really consistent with where the light is coming from. And often I'm really just saying most form lighting is coming from above, right? That makes it, make logical sense. And I'm just sort of generally clear about, okay, this area of the frame is in shadow. This area is in light. The light is coming from above. And I'm just consistent by just repeating those basic rules. And this is what allows you to create stylization, is just saying, look, I know where the light source is coming from. It's kind of vague, but it's coming from above. And so I'm going to render everything as if the light is kind of coming down. And that makes everything pretty simple. And then I tend to separate the planes and the lighting and the drama by kind of having some areas of the frame in shadow and some in the light if I want to sort of play around with that. But that's a really basic, easy way to do it. And often this is kind of all you need, is just to understand, okay, as long as you make it consistent, you're good. Where people often fall into trouble is they kind of put some cool backlighting on something, or they add a cool light source somewhere. And because, again, that's not consistent with the art style, or that's not applied to everything else, it all just kind of tends to fall apart. I have a couple of examples where, again, I'll be using a little bit more lighting and sort of drama. And again, it's just a matter of being really clear. Light is coming from above. Light normally comes from above. If it doesn't come from above, you are going to have to think very clearly about how to render this and how to think about the lighting. So, someone with a more painted style, with a more form-based style is going to need to think about this more. But what I find is that just thinking about where the light is will allow you, even if you are like me and you have a slightly more cartoony look, is that this is often the solution to being able to add more drama and lighting if you do want, is knowing like, okay, there's something that is blocking the light from the scene. You can see that this character is in shadow, but you can see there's a shaft of light coming along here, and that's lighting up this character. This character is in the shadow mostly, except they're receiving a bit of this light, which I'm kind of imagining is kind of hitting here. There is some logic to this, and this allows me to pick up and highlight different sort of characters using some sort of logic. So I'm very clear in this scene where the light is coming from. It's a bit vague. There may be some things that are occluding the light. It's a soft light, but it is coming from scene left, above, like quite a bit, and there's something sort of blocking it here and creating this sort of difference and separation. So it's just a matter of sort of thinking through that, and even if you don't have the most sort of rendered style, you still need to sort of think about these things. If you do want to have a really sort of painted style, this is your bread and butter. You need to constantly always be thinking, where's my light source coming from? Where's my reflected light coming from? This is in shadow. Is it outside? Is it getting reflected light from the sky? Is there multiple lights? You really need to study lighting in general and understand at all times in the scene where your lights are. I found that for most of the time, this is at the root cause of sort of student level or intermediate level art not quite working. It's just inconsistent understanding of where the light is. And if you just write this up, and if you don't know at every point in time where your light source is in your image, then that's a problem. And if you just do that, it'll solve a multitude of sins within your picture. This next one is really simple. Do you know where your horizon line is right now in this image? So often, this is at the core of drawing looking a little bit wonky, and people often think like, hey, I'm not doing some epic scene. I'm not like perspectiving everything out. I'm not even drawing buildings. I don't need my horizon line. If you're just drawing a character, it's so important to know or either have indicated on the page where is your eye level, which is the horizon line in relation to this character. Am I looking at this character so that we're eye to eye? Am I actually placing the camera lower down so it's actually more at their kind of pelvis level, their hip level? Or are we looking up at the character? If you don't get this right, you'll be drawing one part of the character as if you're looking down at it, but actually we should be looking up at it and vice versa. So how does this normally kind of manifest when you're doing day-to-day drawing? So if we're drawing comics, often every panel I'm going to need to think about where is the horizon line. So in this case, I have a bird's eye view of a pirate ship. I'm way above them. We're looking down. The horizon line is way off the page above. If we look here, the horizon line is way below this panel, and I'm sort of looking up at the characters. If I look at this here, you can see the horizon line on the page. It's at the horizon. So this means I'm almost at this character's eye level, and that's kind of how it's working. Same thing here. You can see that's almost literally the eye level. If we look at some of these things, we can see that the horizon line is kind of down low. We're kind of like below everything, and we're sort of looking up at that stuff. You can tell that that's what's going on. And basically every panel that I do, I'm sort of thinking about this as well. Again, we're sort of at eye level, right? We're about here, just underneath there. Here, we're probably somewhere about here, right? Maybe at his kind of hip level or something like that. Again, here, we're probably around here. So you can kind of see these horizon lines based on where the perspective is. If you're not quite sure how to figure out the horizon line with your perspective, then that's a great thing to work on next, is like really understand how cameras, perspective, horizon line, eye line functions. It's often less about actually drawing a whole bunch of lines and just knowing exactly kind of where it is. So here, the horizon line is kind of somewhere sort of around here. But this is tricky because we're sort of looking up at a slope. But yeah, the more you can kind of figure this out, the easier everything is going to be. And again, what I find is like so often people are a little bit vague on this, a little bit sort of fuzzy, like where is it? You should be able to place it within the scene. And if you have no idea where it is, it's very likely that you're going to struggle to actually draw backgrounds and complicated scenes or even just standard characters. When I'm critiquing character design or like character drawings, this is often the problem as well, is like, you know, we're just not sure where we're actually viewing the character from. So are we looking down at the shoes? Do we see the top of the shoes? Where's the belt, right? The belt, is it kind of, we looking down at it or up at it, right? If you figure this stuff out, at least you got a chance at making everything look solid. If you have no idea where this is, it's very likely that you're going to start making massive, massive mistakes. So put this on the wall at all times. You should know, even if you're just playing around, you should have some idea. Where is the horizon line? Make sure this is automatic, easy, fun, and just doesn't take any brain power at all to use, because it's at the core of most good, solid drawing. This last one, I would constantly forget. And I still forget this one, actually. This is one of these things that often seems as if maybe it's not going to be that important, but it is. It's often at the root of what I find to be good illustration, especially when you're trying to create scenes or something a little bit complicated. And it is, do you have a foreground, a middle ground, and a background? I know this is basic stuff, and yet it's very easy to forget to put in these basic things. So what does this look like? Why is it so important? What you'll tend to find is that, and this is what I've kind of been playing around with a lot, is I've got these really kind of simple basic illustrations that I've been sort of playing around with recently, where, you know, I'm trying to take 2 to 3 hours. I'm just playing around, and it's through doing repetition that you kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. And comics are a good example of this as well, where you get to experiment and play around with this. But if you add a really solid foreground, middle ground, and background element to a very simple image, it'll often give it a much, much more high quality feel. So this is a good example where none of this is that fancily drawn. Like if you kind of really zoom up, a lot of this is pretty basic, right? Again, I've been doing this for 25 years at this point. I have a lot of experience just kind of winging it, but it is honestly making sure that I just do the basics as we're talking about. Where's the horizon line? Do I know where the light source is? Do I need a light source? Well, I'm doing flat color art, but again, just knowing and making that consistent helps. And do I have foreground, middle ground, and background? This is often the thing that will make it feel as if it's an illustration, like it's an actual thing. It takes a sketch and a little crummy drawing into something that's much, much more polished. And this is honestly what I found to be one of the superpowers of illustration, just keeping this always happening. Do you have a foreground? Do you have a middle ground? Do you have a background? And early on, when I kind of didn't get this right, things would always be messy. So here you've got another good example of like something that is like, this doesn't have a lot of inherent depth. There's not a lot of contrast between the foreground, the middle ground, background. This is a very muddy kind of image. I wouldn't recommend making an image like this. It's very tricky. But I'm always trying to push the boundaries, I think, of like how muddy and moody can I make it while still making it work. So again, here, I have a pretty good understanding of where the horizon line is, right? It's sort of about here somewhere, right? Again, I can see the top of this foot. I can see this character here, but you know, I'm starting to see the bottom of the face over here. I'm seeing the bottom of this hand, and I'm just constantly adding those cues and kind of making it really obvious. And then what we do is exaggerate those things and make sure, okay, this is above the horizon line. I'm really going to push it. But here, do I have foreground, middle ground, background? Yes, I got this stuff in the foreground. I've got all these different elements that are overlapping. I've got the middle ground where I've got the character and this creature, and then I've got some stuff in the background. Again, it takes what is essentially a little character sketch, a little diorama, and it makes it into much more of an illustration. And this is often what you need to do if you're doing concept art or some other kind of quick style of art. Just make sure you get the basics in there, get your atmospheric perspective, make it work. And what I would kind of find is, yeah, like if I kind of don't do those things, it all starts to fall apart. And I spoke about this in an earlier video on the channel where, you know, often because I didn't work and make sure that I had a good foreground, middle ground, background, everything kind of just looks really flat. It's so easy to fall into this trap of thinking like, well, the scene I kind of got doesn't have a lot of depth in it. I'll be okay. I'll just kind of render it look good. It often doesn't. If you give a scene to a photographer, they're going to go and find some foreground element. They're going to find some way to add a lot of depth. They're going to find some compositional principle to kind of make it work. And this is what you find in every little comic book panel. I need to make sure that I've got foreground, middle ground, background, or that I'm adding some sense of depth. And where I don't, you see these things look really basic, but I'm always trying to make sure that I add some sense of depth and parallax, even if it is just like, here's the character, here's the carriage behind them, and then here's the ground plane that's kind of behind that. The more that we kind of add this depth, the better. And it means that when you get that stuff right, this is where if you do have a really epic scene, you can always make sure that we sort of push the foreground, right, middle ground, background. We can sort of transition them, have the middle ground kind of coming within to the foreground, have that kind of epic sense of depth. And again, this will give you really got a solid understanding of how to add epic depth. Like if you really want to add a lot of foreshortening, that's where we're often making things transition from middle ground to foreground. Make it really clear that there's a huge amount of dimensionality and we're drawing that in perspective. But just making sure you have foreground, middle ground, background will make things good. You can see in this series of panels, these all have foreground, middle ground, background. This one doesn't though. It's just kind of got middle ground, background. It looks really flat, looks really meh. This as well could benefit from having a bird in the foreground, could have a little bit more separation. It really does look very kind of just, it's like very floaty and there's not a lot of interest there. This one's a little bit better, right? We've got a boat here, we've got some clouds in the background. This is kind of in the background. But still, again, the more that probably I could have pushed some waves in the foreground here, pushed some of these things back and forth, the better that would look. And this is where, again, like when I'm doing concept art, this is what will allow me to be going really, really fast. Like drawing these in a couple of hours. And because I've got good foreground, middle ground, background, it can all be pretty rough and still like you'll get something there that kind of works. So this is a really basic concept, but it's honestly one that I forget. I forget this all the time when I'm just storyboarding comics. And yeah, I literally need to stick this on my wall so that I'm always following this. Make sure you have a foreground, middle ground, and a background at all times. Always ask that question, because when you come to finish the illustration, it's always going to pay dividends. Anyway, that's all we got time for in this particular video. Let me know which one of these three really resonates with you. Which is the one, be it knowing where your light source is, knowing where your horizon line is, and making sure you've always got foreground, middle ground, background. Which one do you need to work on the most? And can we commit to trying to do all of these all the time? I think that'll make a big difference. But as I said, like, I honestly still sleep on some of these things. I'm often just drawing a comic book panel and I'll think, I don't need to add a foreground to this. This is just a simple character shot. It'll be interesting enough. And what I notice is, like, when I roll it back and I'm actually rendering that, I'm thinking, oh man, you know what would be good, right? It's just a little bit of stuff in the foreground to make this really sing. It would be really kind of easy. So this is a constant evolution. This is something I always kind of think about, like, am I doing the basics? And I find that I get much more benefit personally from going back to these basic ideas and just making sure I'm doing them on all the art that I do, rather than trying to learn a whole bunch of new fancy stuff. So that's why I bring this to you. Let me know also whether or not you have a different list, whether there are things that you know that, is there one thing, like, what is the number one thing for you that if you were really able to do it and consistently do it on every image, it would really make a difference. I think we can all learn a lot from sharing your experience and your ideas down here. And I think if you can commit to just consistently doing the basics, that, yeah, it'll make a real palpable difference. Anyway, other than that, we'll catch you around. Happy drawing.